Okay, sorting and categorizing students is a standard feature of education systems across the world. And in her paper, Melanie does at least two important things. Firstly, she draws attention to an important and relatively neglected consequence of such processes, namely the differential development of trust, both in outgroup trust and generalized trust in students. And secondly, Melanie makes a connection between the development of trust and the central issue in sociology of education, namely the problem of inequality. And I'd like to build on this with two brief philosophical reflections. The first looks at the connection between trust and inequality from the perspective of the capability approach to well-being and justice. And in the second, I make a couple of points about trust in education from an educational philosophical perspective. In ethics and political philosophy, egalitarianism represents the idea that since people all have the same fundamental inherent worth as human beings, everyone should have an equal chance to live a good life. However, that is defined. Now, there's disagreement about whether bad luck should be compensated for or not, but it is generally agreed within this tradition that as a matter of justice, social causes of inequality should be countered, and so long as they are not removed, compensated for. Now, liberal egalitarianism emphasizes that apart from the value of equality, we should also take the value of liberty into account. Some inequalities and some differences between people in how well their lives go for them may be the result of people's own choices. Taking liberty seriously means we need not and also should not counter or compensate for such inequalities since they're not unjust. In fact, trying to remove these would be unjust at the very least to those who made the better choices. Now, because of his commitment, not just to equality, but also to liberty, philosopher John Rawls, in his Theory of Justice, originally published in 1971, later revised in 1999, he famously defended the idea that certain all-purpose goods, which he called the social primary goods, are the proper object of distributive justice. And these are goods that everyone will want, regardless of whatever else they want. And he lists a number of types of primary goods, such as basic liberties, freedom of thought, expression, movement, and so on, income and wealth, and what he calls the social basis of self-respect. Now, as a matter of justice, people are entitled to an equal set of basic liberties, and any differences in income and wealth can only be justified for Rawls if they benefit the worst off. Now, this view was criticized by Amartya Sen in his 1979 Tanner lecture, Equality of What? And Sen pointed out that people differ so much from each other and even from themselves in different stages of life that a focus on means, on all-purpose goods is problematic. People need very different goods, and also people differ strongly in their ability to convert those all-purpose goods into valued functionings, valued ways of being and doing. Rawls' view, for instance, has no obvious relevance for children. It's also problematic for people with disabilities, which another capability theorist, Martha Nussbaum, also pointed out. So Sen therefore shifts attention to capabilities and functionings instead of those primary goods. He focuses on people's real possibilities and abilities, not just negative freedoms, to realize valuable forms of being and doing. And capabilities offer an interesting alternative way to think about well-being as well as about justice. Martha Nussbaum's capability theory is an influential example also of a capability theory of justice. And what matters as a matter of justice, according to Nussbaum, is that everyone is entitled to reach at least a threshold level of what she calls the central human capabilities, such as being able to enjoy a life of a normal length and in good health, to use the imagination, the senses, to think and reason in a truly human way, to live with and toward others, to have a measure of control over one's environment, both politically and materially, and others. Now, what I want to suggest, and the reason I bring all this up, is that the capability approach can offer an interesting way to see the connections between inequality and the development of trust. But it's not difficult to see how and why the ability to trust unspecified others, and beyond that to have a basic trust in the world, as well as the ability to trust specific others, are an aspect of or even presupposed by the central human capabilities listed by Nussbaum. Being able to trust others is crucial to the capability to form meaningful relations with others and to cooperate with others. And by implication also to the capability to exert a measure of control over one's environment, at least politically. So what this means, in short, is that the differential development of trust in students is not just to be seen as another undesirable consequence of processes of sorting and categorizing students besides inequality, nor only as an undesirable consequence of inequality, but as itself a form of inequality in capabilities that should be addressed as a matter of justice. So that's my first and largest, longest reflection. The second is a bit short. Now, this point I just made about trust as a presupposition of the development of central human capabilities is, from an educational philosophical perspective, not new. For Otto Friedrich Bollnow, for instance, generalized trust was the irreplaceable presupposition of all human life and all human development and education. Martin Buber also wrote about this. I won't quote him because of the time. The late Ben Speaker, a former professor of philosophy of education at our department, also wrote a very interesting article about trust, which also references these authors. However, it seems important to me to note that trust in and of itself, of whatever kind, with the possible exception of the infant's instinctive basic trust in its carers, as Speaker calls it, is not necessarily a good thing. The capacity to trust in the world or in others, if and when such trust is warranted by how the world is and by how others are inclined towards you, is a good thing. As Melanie also argued, education can, in theory, contribute to people's ability to make that distinction between when trust is proper and when it would be unjustified. But she also made the important observation that processes of sorting and categorizing students can undermine or hinder the development of trust. And here, I think it's very important to distinguish a causal effect from a response that, whether conscious or not, may in fact be entirely reasonable and appropriate. So these processes of sorting and categorizing, they interact with existing forms of social inequality and disadvantage. And in many cases, the experience of being sorted, so to speak, will confirm students' existing view of how they are perceived by others. But for some, this will mean a confirmation that others view them as less capable, less promising, less worth teachers in an effort. And in such cases, distrust, both in specific others and in society at large, can be a justified response. And when it is, it would be, in fact, be wrong to try to rid students of their distrust. But the only ethical response would be to strive for a situation in which trust on the part of these students is warranted. The difficulty is, however, that I think that much of this doesn't take place experientially on the level of explicit beliefs. So as philosopher of education Paul Smeyers writes, trust indicates an attitude of optimism concerning the goodwill and competence of another. And trust, therefore, restricts the interpretations, he says, that we will consider as possibly applying to the words and actions of another. The attitude of optimism is not primarily conceived in terms of beliefs about the other's trustworthiness, but rather in terms of a distinctive and effectively loaded way of seeing the one trusted, end quote. Now, this is likely to mean that students' disposition to either trust or distrust others, once it is more or less stably formed, is not readily amenable to change. So especially not when beliefs, the cognitive grounds for trust or distrust, are targeted. A final point, Smeyers writes about trust in the context of an explanation of care education, as this has been called, is interesting, I think, in this context, because it can inform pedagogies that promote the capacity for warranted trust. And among the central insights care education offers are the fundamental importance of a genuine caring relationship between teacher and students. And here the approach is informed by Buber's work. And this is something that, as Nell Noddings notes, students again and again express a longing for. Secondly, the importance for the development of trust in students of teachers trusting them and showing it. And thirdly, the importance of sensitivity to the risk involved in trust. And this is the risk that for some students may well be significantly higher than others. That is another dimension of inequality here. Those were my thoughts, my comments. Anyone interested in the references can receive the PowerPoint.